Family dinners at Russell's parents' house were a gauntlet Angelica had yet to master. The dining room gleamed with ostentatious luxury. A long, lacquered mahogany table, stretched beneath a chandelier dripping with crystals, each place setting adorned with polished silver and delicate china. Crystal goblets brimmed with tart red wine, its sharp aroma mingling with the scent of roasted lamb and rosemary wafting from the kitchen. The scene was flawless, a tableau of wealth and refinement, but the strained smiles around the table betrayed years of unspoken grievances, festering beneath the surface like a slow poison. Angelica sat stiffly, an outsider in this curated world, as if she were an exhibit in a museum, on display for the family to scrutinize, their eyes flicking over her with polite curiosity or veiled disdain. Today's gathering marked the birthday of Russell's father, Ken Rogers, a man who seemed carved from granite. His resolute chin jutted forward like a challenge, and his piercing gray eyes swept the room with the authority of a judge delivering a verdict. A retired attorney with unshakable conservative convictions, Ken carried himself as though the world bent to his will, and it often did. Russell's mother, Amanda Rogers, presented a softer contrast at first glance. Her pastel cardigan and gentle smile suggested warmth, but Angelica had learned to spot the steel beneath the sweetness. Amanda's accommodating nature was a carefully honed tool, wielded with a subtle knack for bending others to her designs. The meal was a masterpiece: succulent lamb glazed with honey, buttery mashed potatoes flecked with chives, and a vibrant medley of glazed carrots. But the richness of the food couldn't mask the suffocating tension in the air. Conversation swirled around Russell, as it always did. Ken's deep voice rumbled with pride as he recounted his son's latest triumphs at the law firm. "Closed that merger deal in under a month," he said, swirling his wine glass. "The partners couldn't stop singing your praises." Russell leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "It's just a matter of knowing how to play the game, Dad. Timing and leverage." Amanda chimed in, her tone lilting with practiced charm. "And such a bright future ahead. Have you given any more thought to that promotion they've been dangling in front of you?" Angelica picked at her food, her fork scraping faintly against the plate as the discussion flowed past her. She was mentioned only in fleeting asides. Ken's gruff, "You're looking well, Angelica," or Amanda's syrupy, "That dress is so modest, dear. It suits you." The words were hollow, a formality to fill the silence before the spotlight swung back to Russell. She forced a smile, nodding at the right moments, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass as she fought the urge to shrink into herself. Russell thrived in this glow of admiration. He'd always been the golden son, the one who could do no wrong, and Angelica remembered how that had once drawn her in. Years ago, she'd fallen for his broad shoulders and easy confidence, the way he commanded a room with a laugh or a well-timed quip. His strength had felt like a shield, his charisma a flame that warmed her. But time had a way of peeling back the polish. That strength morphed into a need to control every detail of their lives, where they went, what she wore, how she spoke. The charisma hardened into something colder, a tyranny cloaked in charm, and she wondered how she'd ever mistaken it for love. "Angelica, you're awfully quiet tonight," Amanda said suddenly, her head tilting with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't you think Russell's doing wonderfully?" She swallowed, her throat dry despite the sip of wine she'd just taken. "Oh, yes," she managed, her voice softer than she intended. "He's incredible at what he does." Russell shot her a glance, his smirk widening as if her words were a trophy to add to his collection. "She's my biggest fan," he said, reaching over to pat her hand, a gesture that felt more possessive than affectionate. Ken chuckled, a low, approving sound, and the conversation rolled on, leaving Angelica to sink back into her role as the silent observer, trapped in a gilded cage of their making. The clatter of shattering glass sliced through the room like a guillotine. Angelica's hand had slipped, knocking over her crystal goblet, and a cascade of tart red wine splashed across the pristine white tablecloth. The stain bloomed like blood, an ugly, jagged mark against the perfection of the setting. Her breath caught in her chest, a cold wave of dread washing over her as every eye turned in her direction. "Careless," Russell muttered, his voice low and venomous. His scorching glare pinned her in place, the heat of it searing her skin. "How can you be so clumsy, Angelica? Honestly, it's pathetic." Her face flushed, a deep crimson spreading from her cheeks to her ears, humiliation prickling at her like 1,000 tiny needles. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words lodged in her throat, thick and unyielding, as if her voice had abandoned her under his stare. "Russell, not now," Amanda interjected, her tone smooth and placating, a practiced attempt to douse the sparks before they ignited. She reached for a napkin, dabbing at the spill with quick, nervous movements, though her eyes flicked toward her son with a hint of apprehension. "No, Mom, she did this on purpose," Russell snapped, his voice rising as he leaned forward, his gaze never wavering from Angelica. "She's always pulling stunts like this to steal the attention. Look at her, playing the victim again." Angelica's head dipped, her dark hair falling like a curtain to shield her face as she fought the sting of tears. She clenched her hands in her lap, nails digging into her palms. Silence was her refuge. She'd learned long ago that arguing only fanned his anger into a wildfire. But tonight, something simmered beneath her skin, a quiet rebellion that had been building for months. Tonight, she was done swallowing her voice. The tension thickened with every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, its steady rhythm a mocking counterpoint to the chaos unfolding. Ken sat at the head of the table, his stern features unreadable, observing the scene as if it were a courtroom drama he'd seen 100 times before, distant, detached, a spectator to his son's temper. Amanda's fingers twisted the napkin into a tight knot, her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing more, her earlier attempt at peace abandoned. Russell shoved his chair back with a screech, the sound grating against the silence, and surged to his feet. Before Angelica could react, his hand clamped around her arm, fingers digging into her flesh like iron. "Let's talk," he growled, yanking her toward the doorway that led to the dimly lit hall beyond the dining room. His grip was unrelenting, a vice she couldn't escape. "Russell, you're hurting me," she said, her voice trembling but clear, a quiet plea as she twisted against his hold. "Please let me go." "I said come!" he roared, his patience snapping like a brittle twig. His hand shot up, swift and brutal, and the back of it cracked across her cheek. The blow landed with a sickening thud, a burst of white-hot pain exploding across her face. The world tilted, colors blurring into a dizzying smear as she stumbled, her hand flying to her cheek where the skin already burned. She caught herself against the edge of the table, her legs trembling, barely holding her upright. A suffocating silence descended, heavy and absolute. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against her chest. Ken's gaze drifted to the window, his jaw tight but unmoving, as if the outburst were a minor inconvenience not worth addressing. Amanda busied herself folding and refolding the napkin, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, avoiding the sight of her son's handiwork. They'd seen this before. Russell's temper flaring like a storm, leaving wreckage in its wake, and they'd long since mastered the art of looking away, of pretending the ugliness didn't exist. Angelica's breath hitched, her fingers brushing the tender spot on her cheek where a bruise was already forming. The pain sharpened her senses, cutting through the fog of fear. She straightened slowly, her eyes locking onto Russell's, and for the first time in years, she felt the flicker of something fierce ignite within her, a spark that refused to be snuffed out. But Angelica's response defied the script they all knew by heart. Instead of the familiar flood of tears or the cowering flinch of fear, a cold, deliberate smile curled her lips. She drew herself up, her spine straightening as if shedding an invisible weight, and met Russell's gaze head on. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. Russell froze, his hand still hovering in the air where it had struck her. Confusion flickered across his face, his brows knitting together as he stared at her. He'd braced himself for the usual, her trembling pleas for forgiveness, the glassy terror in her eyes that always fed his sense of power. But this icy calm, this unyielding determination staring back at him, it was a language he didn't speak. His mouth parted slightly, caught off guard as if the ground beneath him had shifted. "What did you just say?" he demanded, his tone sharp but tinged with uncertainty, a crack in the armor of his authority. "I said," Angelica repeated, her voice slow and deliberate, each word a quiet hammer strike. "If you're done, let's go back to the table." She held his gaze, unflinching, her hazel eyes glinting with something he couldn't name, something that made his stomach twist. Russell's hand drifted to his hair, fingers raking through the dark strands in a nervous tick he rarely betrayed. It was a tell, a subtle fracture in his polished facade, a sign that for the first time in years, he wasn't the one steering the moment. His jaw tightened, but no retort came. He turned sharply on his heel, stalking back into the dining room without a word, his broad shoulders rigid with unspoken frustration. It was a small victory, a fleeting triumph in the long, bruising war Angelica had waged against her husband's dominance. She followed him quietly, her steps measured, her eyes fixed on the back of his head, his neatly trimmed hair, the tense line of his neck. Her mind churned, thoughts spinning like gears clicking into place. The plan, the one she'd been nursing in secret for weeks, might actually work. A flicker of hope pulsed beneath her calm exterior, steady and sure, as she crossed the threshold back into the lion's den. Ken glanced up as they re-entered, his piercing eyes narrowing slightly, though he said nothing. His silence, a fortress of indifference. Amanda's hand stilled on the napkin she'd been twisting, her lips parting as if to speak, but she quickly pressed them shut, her gaze darting between her son and Angelica. The air crackled with unspoken questions, but no one dared voice them. Russell slid into his chair, his movements stiff, and reached for his wineglass, downing a long swallow as if to drown the unease creeping up his spine. Angelica settled beside him, her hands folding neatly in her lap, that faint, enigmatic smile still lingering. She could feel the weight of their stares, Ken's scrutiny, Amanda's nervous curiosity, Russell's simmering agitation. But she let it roll off her like water. For once, she wasn't the one bending. For once, she held the reins, even if they didn't know it yet. Angelica first crossed paths with Russell in the unlikeliest of places, the bustling little nail salon, where she'd been working since arriving in the United States. The air hummed with the sharp tang of acetone and the soft whir of electric files, a symphony of chatter and laughter weaving through the rows of polished bottles lining the walls. She was bent over a client's hand, her nimble fingers deftly shaping a cuticle, when the bell above the door chimed and Russell stepped inside. He carried himself with an effortless swagger, his tailored blazer and crisp shirt a stark contrast to the casual chaos of the salon. His eyes swept the room and landed on her almost instantly, as if drawn by some invisible thread. As it would later become clear, Russell was a regular, his nails always impeccable, buffed to a subtle sheen that spoke of meticulous care. That day he strode up to the manager, a wiry woman with a clipboard perpetually tucked under her arm, and flashed a disarming smile. "Mind if I request her?" he asked, nodding toward Angelica. The manager shrugged, unfazed, and waved him over to her station. He settled into the chair across from her, his broad hands resting on the cushioned table between them. I'm Russell, he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. And you are... Angelica, she replied, glancing up with a shy smile as she reached for a file. They slipped into conversation as easily as breathing. Russell was a talker, a master of words, each one chosen with the elegance of a poet and delivered with the confidence of a man who knew their power. He asked about her life, her accent, her story, and she found herself opening up, the words spilling out like they'd been waiting for someone to listen. I've been here a couple of years, she told him, her hands moving steadily over his nails. I was in college, studying biology, actually, but I had to take a break. She paused, brushing a speck of dust from his cuticle. The program that paid my tuition got cut, and I couldn't afford it anymore. So here I am, saving up to go back. Russell's eyebrows lifted, genuine surprise flickering in his hazel eyes. Biology? That's not what I expected to hear in a nail salon. He leaned forward slightly, resting his chin on his hand, as if settling in for a good story. What do you want to do with it? She laughed, a soft melodic sound that lit up her face. I want to study ecosystems, how everything connects, you know? Plants, animals, the whole web of life. I've always loved that kind of thing. She shrugged, a little self-conscious. And nails? Any girl can do nails. It's not hard. Keeps the bills paid while I figure things out. He nodded, his gaze warm and attentive, hanging on her every word. You're a bright one, aren't you? I can tell. You'll get that degree, I'd bet on it. Angelica was striking, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders, her eyes a vivid hazel that caught the light, her smile quick and unguarded. At 23, she carried a quiet resilience, a spark that shone through even in the fluorescent glow of the salon. That day, as Russell's charm wove its spell, she thought his interest was pure, born of curiosity about her dreams, maybe even a desire to help. He asked more questions, offered little encouragements, and by the time she finished painting a clear top coat over his nails, she felt a flutter of hope. Maybe he was someone who saw her, not just the girl behind the counter. But Russell's intentions weren't what they seemed. Beneath the polished words and easy smiles lay something else, a hunger, a need to possess what caught his eye. Angelica didn't see it then, dazzled as she was by his attention. She didn't yet know that the man who'd walked into her life that day wasn't a savior, but a storm gathering on the horizon. A week later, the bell above the salon door chimed again, and there was Russell, stepping inside with that same easy confidence. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting golden streaks across the tiled floor as he approached the manager, who was hunched over her clipboard, scribbling something with a chewed-up pen. Angelica around? He asked, his tone casual but deliberate. The manager barely looked up. Her shift starts in an hour. You can come back or... I'll wait. Russell cut in smoothly, flashing a smile that could have charmed the paint off the walls. He settled into one of the cushioned chairs by the reception desk, pulling out his phone but keeping one eye on the door. When Angelica arrived, her apron slung over her arm and her hair tied back in a loose ponytail, she spotted him immediately. A grin broke across her face, bright and unguarded. Back already? She teased, sliding into her station and gesturing for him to sit. Your nails must grow faster than kudzu. Didn't I just do them last week? Russell chuckled, easing into the chair across from her, his hands resting on the table like he owned the place. What can I say? I like to keep them sharp. But it's not just that. I've got some good news. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping as if sharing a secret. Remember our talk last time? About your studies? She nodded, her hands pausing as she reached for the nail file, curiosity sparking in her eyes. Yeah, of course. Well, he said, drawing out the moment, I did some digging. Turns out there's a private fund I know about, connected to a client of mine. They support students in situations like yours. It could cover your tuition, maybe even more. Angelica blinked, the words sinking in slowly like raindrops on parched soil. "Wait, what? You mean they'd pay for my college?" Her voice trembled with disbelief, her hands hovering over his, forgotten. "Potentially, yeah," Russell said, his smile widening as he watched her reaction. "I'd have to pull a few strings, make some calls, but I think you'd qualify. I told them about you, smart, driven, just needing a break. They're interested." Her breath caught, and then a laugh bubbled up, pure and unrestrained. "Oh my God, Russell, are you serious?" She didn't wait for an answer. Her arms shot out, wrapping him in a quick, impulsive hug across the table, her cheek brushing his shoulder. "Thank you. I can't believe this." He laughed too, patting her back lightly before she pulled away, her face flushed with joy. "Hey, don't thank me yet. I just opened the door. You're the one who's going to walk through it." She beamed, shaking her head as she started on his nails, her movements lighter now, almost buoyant. She knew Russell liked her. It was obvious in the way his eyes lingered, the way he found excuses to keep the conversation flowing, and he wasn't hard to like in return. A successful lawyer with his own practice, he carried an air of accomplishment that drew people in. He was handsome, too, sharp jawline, dark hair just tousled enough to look effortless, a smile that could melt ice. From that day, their connection grew. They started texting. Little messages at first, a "how's your day" here, a "thought of you" there. Then came the invitations. "Want to catch a movie?" he'd ask, and soon they were sitting in the dim glow of a theater, sharing popcorn and whispering about the plot. They'd linger at cozy cafes afterward, cups of coffee steaming between them as he spun stories about his cases, and she told him about the biology books she still pored over in her spare time. He was sweet, attentive, bringing her a pastry he'd picked up on the way, holding doors open, laughing at her jokes, even when they stumbled. To Angelica, it felt like the start of something real, something good. She didn't see the calculation behind his kindness, the way he was weaving a web she'd only notice when she was too tangled to escape. For now, he was her knight in a pressed suit, and she let herself believe in the fairy tale. One quiet afternoon, as they sat across from each other at her station in the nail salon, Angelica's curiosity bubbled up again. She'd been thinking about the private fund Russell had dangled like a lifeline weeks ago, the promise of it still shimmering in her mind. "Hey," she said, glancing up from buffing his nails, "that fund you mentioned, do you think there's a way I could look into it more? Like, is there an application or something I need to do?" Russell's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flicked away for a split second before returning to her. "Oh, that," he said breezily, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. "It's a bit complicated, lots of red tape. You know how these things are. I'm still working on it, though, don't worry." His voice was smooth, the lie slipping out so effortlessly that Angelica didn't even catch the faint hitch in his tone. She nodded, trusting, and let it drop, her focus shifting back to the task at hand. A few days later, she brought it up again over coffee, her mug cradled between her hands as steam curled into the air. "Any news on that fund?" she asked, her tone light but hopeful. Russell sighed, setting his cup down with a faint clink. "I hate to break it to you, but I got word back. They're only funding certain departments this round, and biology didn't make the cut. I tried, though." He reached across the table, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze, his expression all sympathy. It was another fabrication, spun with just enough regret to sound convincing, and Angelica bought it, her shoulders slumping slightly as she murmured, "Oh, well, thanks for trying." But Russell wasn't done weaving his narrative. Over the next few weeks, he shifted his approach, his words growing warmer, more personal. "You know," he said one evening as they strolled out of a movie theater, the neon lights casting a glow across his face, "I really admire your dreams, Angelica. The way you talk about biology, about making a difference. It's inspiring. You deserve to be helped no matter what it takes." His tone was earnest, his gaze lingering on her, and she felt a flush of gratitude at his support. She didn't catch the hints at first, the way he'd pause after lines like that, waiting for her to connect the dots. He was planting seeds, nudging her toward an idea he'd already decided on. Then, one crisp evening as they sat on a park bench after dinner, the city lights twinkling in the distance, he sprang it on her. He turned to her, his expression soft but intense, and asked, "Have you ever thought about me as, a potential spouse?" Angelica froze, the question hitting her like a gust of cold wind. Her breath caught, and for a moment she didn't know where to look. His searching eyes, the ground, the stars overhead. What?" she stammered, a nervous laugh escaping her as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Wow, that's out of nowhere." She forced a smile, trying to play it cool, but her heart thudded awkwardly in her chest. Russell had been inching closer lately, lingering touches on her arm, compliments that felt heavier, invitations that stretched late into the night. He wanted her, that much was clear, and he wasn't subtle about it anymore. "I'm serious," he pressed, leaning in, his voice low and coaxing. "I think we'd be good together, don't you? I could take care of you, your dreams, your future, all of it." She shifted on the bench, her hands twisting together in her lap. "You're sweet, Russell, really," she said, her tone careful. "But, I don't know, I haven't thought that far ahead." It was the truth. She liked him, enjoyed his company, but the leap from coffee dates to marriage felt like a canyon she wasn't ready to cross. His intensity unsettled her, stirring a flicker of doubt she couldn't quite name. Still, she smiled, hoping to soften the moment, unsure how to navigate the sudden weight he'd dropped between them. Angelica had been raised in a tight-knit, conservative family where traditions ran deep and intimacy before marriage was a line firmly drawn in the sand. It wasn't just a rule, it was a value woven into the fabric of her community, one she carried with her even across borders. She liked Russell, genuinely enjoyed his company, and she'd tried to show it in her own way. Warm smiles, lingering conversations, little gestures of appreciation. But she also hinted, as delicately as she could, that he was moving too fast, pushing boundaries she wasn't ready to cross. "I really like spending time with you," she'd say, her tone soft but pointed. "But I'm not in a rush, Russell either missed the cues entirely or chose to barrel past them, his focus fixed on a prize she hadn't agreed to give. To Russell, Angelica was a puzzle, an enigma wrapped in quiet strength and subtle charm. She didn't melt under his attention the way others didn't bend to his will with a flutter of lashes or a coy laugh. It intrigued him, maybe even obsessed him, and he doubled down, showering her with care. Compliments on her laugh, surprise coffees dropped off at the salon, late-night texts asking about her day. One afternoon, as they sat in a quiet corner of a cafe, he leaned across the table, his eyes bright with excitement. "I've got something for you," he said, pausing for effect. "I reached out to your department at the college. They said you could resume your studies next semester if the funding's sorted. I'm working on it, really working on it." Her jaw dropped, a mix of disbelief and gratitude washing over her. "Russell, you didn't," she breathed, her hands clasping together. That's incredible. Thank you." His words felt like proof, a tangible sign that his intentions were serious, that he saw her dreams as more than just a passing story. She started to believe he might truly care, that his persistence was rooted in something deeper than she'd first assumed. Then came the day that turned everything upside down. Russell had invited her to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place with white tablecloths, candlelight flickering in crystal holders, and waiters who hovered just out of sight. She dressed up, feeling a flutter of excitement, thinking it was just another nice evening out. They'd finished their entrees, hers a delicate salmon, his a perfectly seared steak, when he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Before she could process it, he slid out of his chair, dropping to one knee right there in the middle of the dining room. Conversations hushed, heads turned, and a sea of eyes fixed on them. "Angelica," he said, his voice loud enough to carry, "will you marry me?" Her heart slammed against her ribs, shock rooting her to the spot. The ring glinted under the soft lights, a diamond that screamed expense and expectation. She felt the weight of the room pressing in, the unspoken pressure of a public proposal where a no would humiliate him in front of strangers. Her mouth went dry, words failing her as she stared at him, his confident smile unwavering. It was too early, far too early. She wasn't even sure they were dating, not in the way he seemed to think. Marriage? She hadn't even let herself imagine it, not with him, not yet. She liked Russell. He was kind, supportive, always there with a word or a gesture to lift her up. But now, in the harsh clarity of that moment, a realization crept in, cold and sharp. Everything he'd done, the attention, the promises, the talk of her tuition, it wasn't selfless. He'd been building a bridge to one thing, something she'd held back because of her beliefs, her boundaries. And when charm and patience didn't get him there, he'd escalated to this, a proposal, a trap disguised as romance, laid out where she'd feel cornered into saying yes. She started, her voice barely a whisper, her hands trembling in her lap. She forced a smile, buying time, her mind racing for a way out that wouldn't shatter the fragile thing they'd built, or the man kneeling before her, oblivious to the storm he'd just unleashed. Angelica sat there, the velvet box open in Russell's hand, the diamond catching the candlelight like a tiny star. She couldn't believe this was happening, her life unfolding like a dream she hadn't dared to imagine. The restaurant's hum faded into a distant buzz as her mind spun, painting a picture of Russell that felt almost too perfect to be real. A successful lawyer with his own practice, born into a respected family with a sprawling house and impeccable manners. He'd been nothing but caring, planning thoughtful dates, cheering her on about her studies, making her laugh with his quick wit and easy charm. He was the kind of guy who'd order her favorite dessert without asking, who'd hold her hand in a crowded room like she was the only one there. To her, he was a fun, vibrant soul wrapped in a polished suit, and she couldn't spot a single red flag through the rosy haze of it all. She'd said yes that night, her voice shaky but warm, swept up in the moment and the weight of his hope-filled eyes. The room had erupted in applause, strangers smiling at them as Russell slid the ring onto her finger, his grin wide and triumphant. It felt like a fairy tale, and for a while, it stayed that way. The wedding came together in a whirlwind, elegant but intimate, held in a garden draped with fairy lights and blooming roses. Russell stood at the altar in a tailored tuxedo, his hair just tousled enough to look effortlessly handsome, and when he took her hands and vowed to support her dreams, she believed every word. Her mother flew in from overseas for the occasion, her eyes brimming with tears the moment she saw Angelica in her ivory gown, the lace trailing behind her like a whisper of tradition. "My girl," she'd said, pulling Angelica into a tight hug, her voice thick with joy. "I've never seen you so happy. And Russell, he's a gem, a real gentleman. I'm over the moon for you." She'd beamed through the ceremony, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief as the couple exchanged rings, her pride radiating brighter than the summer sun overhead. Angelica felt it too, happiness like a warm tide washing over her. Russell was her partner, her cheerleader, her rock. He'd tease her about her late-night study sessions, leaving little notes on her textbooks like, "Don't forget to sleep, genius," and he'd surprise her with takeout when she was too buried in work to cook. His family welcomed her with open arms, Amanda fussing over her like a doting mother, Ken offering gruff but kind words of approval. It was everything she'd been taught to want, everything her conservative upbringing had primed her to cherish in a husband. The cracks hadn't shown yet, the shadows still tucked neatly out of sight, and for now, she let herself drift in the glow of a life that seemed, at last, to be falling perfectly into place. Just a week after the wedding, the fairy tale began to fray at the edges, and Angelica couldn't make sense of it. The shift was so sudden, so jarring, that it left her reeling, as if the ground beneath her had cracked open. Russell, her Russell, the man she'd married, had morphed into a stranger overnight. The charming, supportive partner she'd known before the vows was gone, replaced by someone she couldn't recognize, someone whose every word and glance carried a weight she hadn't felt before. Before marriage, Russell had been her biggest cheerleader. He'd sit with her over coffee, listening intently as she mapped out her dreams of finishing college, becoming a biologist, unraveling the mysteries of ecosystems. "You're going to change the world," he'd say with that warm, crooked smile, his hand brushing hers. He'd been thoughtful, leaving her little gifts like a new notebook for her studies, or surprising her with dinner after a long shift at the salon. That Russell had made her feel seen, valued, like her ambitions mattered as much to him as they did to her. But now, everything she did seemed to ignite a spark of irritation in him. Even small things set him off. When he was upset, he wielded silence like a weapon, icing her out completely. He'd retreat to the couch, leaving their bed empty, ignoring her as if she were a ghost haunting their apartment. She'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering where the man she'd married had gone. The aggression crept in slowly, insidious and quiet at first, then louder, sharper. His words turned cutting. "You're so naive," he'd sneer when she stumbled over a decision, or, "Can't you do anything right?" When she forgot some minor detail, he'd loom over her during arguments, his voice booming, his presence filling the room until she felt small, shrinking into herself. The emotional barbs piled up, each one chipping away at her confidence, her sense of self. He'd criticize her choices, her clothes, her laugh, twisting her into knots until she second-guessed everything. She didn't see it happening, not at first, how his control tightened around her like ivy strangling a tree. She'd apologize when she didn't need to, adjust her plans to appease him, tiptoe around his moods to keep the peace. The vibrant, dreaming Angelica who'd once laughed freely and chased her goals was fading, replaced by someone who lived in the shadow of his temper. And Russell, the man she'd thought was her partner, watched it happen with a satisfaction she couldn't yet name, his grip on her tightening with every passing day. A year had passed since their wedding, the anniversary marked not by celebration but by a fracture that split their fragile peace wide open. It began at a friend's gathering, a cozy backyard affair with Russell's circle, lawyers, their polished spouses, and a handful of kids chasing fireflies as dusk settled in. The air smelled of grilled burgers and citronella, laughter weaving through the hum of conversation. Russell was holding court near the fire pit, spinning a story about a case when he tossed out a casual fact about climate change, something offhand and slightly wrong. Angelica, perched on a lawn chair beside him, chimed in with a playful smile. "Actually, babe, it's more like this," she said, correcting him gently, her tone light and teasing, the kind of affectionate nudge couples often share. The group chuckled and she thought nothing of it, sipping her lemonade as the night rolled on. But in the car on the way home, the mood shifted. Russell gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the leather, his silence thick and heavy. Angelica glanced at him, unease prickling her skin, but she said nothing. Waiting for the storm, she sensed brewing. Then, out of nowhere, his voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "You should really watch your mouth around my friends." She blinked, startled, her heart stuttering. "What? Russell, I didn't mean anything by it. I was just joking." Her apology came quick, genuine, her brows knitting as she turned to him. "What happened? Did I upset you?" He didn't answer, not directly. Instead, his jaw tightened, and he unleashed a venom she hadn't heard before. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Always showing off. If you're so damn smart, how come you were broke when I met you? Huh? You'd still be slaving away in that nail salon if I hadn't pulled you out of that hole." His words lashed out, sharp and deliberate, each one landing like a slap. Angelica's breath caught, her hands twisting in her lap as she tried to steady herself. "Russell, that's not fair. I was working hard. You know that. I just wanted to help you get it right back there. I wasn't trying to—" "You upset me," he snapped, cutting her off, his voice cold and final. "I don't want to talk to you right now." He turned his face to the road, shutting her out, the silence that followed heavier than any shout. From that night, something dark unfurled in Russell, a side of him that had lurked beneath the surface now bared in full. It wasn't just a one-off flare of temper, it became a pattern, systematic and relentless. Every minor disagreement, every time she dared to voice a complaint or question him, he'd pounce. "What, you think you know better than me?" He'd sneer, his tone dripping with contempt. If she mentioned a tough day at work, he'd roll his eyes. "Oh, poor you. Maybe if you weren't so useless, you wouldn't be stuck there." Her every move, every word became fodder for his insults, a chance to chip away at her until she felt smaller than the dust on their shelves. She started walking on eggshells, her steps tentative, her voice hushed. She'd bite back opinions about a movie, a meal, anything, knowing one wrong syllable could set him off. His blow-ups weren't loud every time. Sometimes it was a quiet, cutting remark. Other times a full-on tirade that left her trembling. "You're lucky I put up with you," he'd say, his eyes hard, and she'd shrink, wondering when the man who'd once lifted her up had turned into this stranger who seemed hell-bent on tearing her down. The shift was so gradual, so insidious that she didn't see how she'd become a shadow of herself, tethered to his moods, her spirit bending under the weight of his scorn. When Angelica gave birth to their son, Benjamin, a fragile new light entered her world, but it didn't soften Russell's edges. If anything, it sharpened them. Ben's cries, those primal, helpless wails of hunger or exhaustion, became a fresh target for Russell's rage. "Shut him up already!" he'd bellow from the couch, his voice slicing through the apartment as Angelica rocked the baby in her arms, her own exhaustion a heavy cloak. She never asked Russell to help. She knew better than to expect it. She'd cradle Ben through the night, soothing his whimpers, while Russell complained that the noise kept him awake, as if she weren't the one bearing the weight of every feeding, every diaper change. Russell's cruelty didn't spare Angelica either. Her English, still tinged with the cadence of her first language, sometimes tripped over itself, a mispronounced word here, a tangled phrase there. Before, he'd found it endearing. Now, it was ammunition. "What's that supposed to mean, dumbass?" he'd snap, his lips curling into a sneer when she stumbled. Retard slipped into his lexicon, a casual barb he'd fling whenever his temper flared. If she pushed back, saying his words weren't right, he'd mimic her in a high, mocking falsetto. "Oh, poor me, I'm such a victim," twisting her protests into something pathetic, laughable. She couldn't fathom why he'd turned into this man, this stranger wearing her husband's face. The answer loomed just out of reach, a truth she'd uncover soon, but it would come on the heels of a moment that shattered any lingering illusions. It happened one evening, months into Ben's infancy, over something as trivial as a misplaced phone. Angelica was in the shower, the hot water a rare reprieve, when Russell's voice boomed through the apartment, sharp and frantic. She stepped out, towel clutched around her, hair dripping onto the hardwood, to find him tearing through the bedroom, his face red with fury. "Where'd you put my phone?" he shouted, yanking drawers open, tossing pillows aside. "I know you moved it." "I didn't touch it," she said, her voice calm but firm, water pooling at her feet. "I need to get dressed. Can you let me through?" He was blocking the doorway, peering behind the door as if the phone might be hiding there, his broad frame a wall she couldn't pass. "Move, please?" she asked, a faint edge creeping into her tone despite her effort to keep it soft. That was all it took. Russell whipped around, his eyes blazing, and shoved her hard into the room. She stumbled back, catching herself against the dresser, the towel slipping slightly as shock rippled through her. "Okay, you need to calm down," she said, steadying her breath. "I'll help you look, but I need to get dressed first." "Hurry up, then!" he barked, his voice a whip crack. She straightened, her patience fraying. "I'm not hurrying because it's not my fault you lost it," she snapped, the words escaping before she could reel them back. Russell turned, his hand flashing out, and the back of it struck her mouth. A quick, sharp blow. It didn't hurt much, more sting than force. But the shock of it rooted her to the spot, her breath hitching as she touched her lip, tasting the faint tang of blood. She stared at him, wide-eyed, appalled, the air between them thick with a new, terrible weight. He shrugged, his expression hardening. "That was just a warning tap," he said coolly. "Watch your attitude." For the first time, fear coiled tight in her chest, cold and unyielding. She felt cornered, helpless, a mouse trapped under a cat's paw. The man she'd married, the one she'd once trusted, loomed over her like a threat she couldn't escape. Shame burned hot behind her eyes, but she blinked it back, unwilling to let him see her break. She couldn't tell anyone, not her friends, not her family. The thought of their judgment, their pity, or worse, their questions. "How did you let this happen? Why didn't you leave?" twisted her stomach into knots. She feared they'd see her as weak, as complicit, when all she'd done was love a man who'd turned into a monster. Alone in that moment, with Ben's soft cries echoing from the crib down the hall, she felt the walls closing in, her world shrinking to the size of his shadow. That moment, Russell's hand striking her mouth, his casual dismissal of it as a warning tap, crystallized everything for Angelica. She was trapped. A realization that sank into her bones like ice water. Russell treated her like a plastic toy, something he could bend, twist, or toss aside at his whim. She wanted to bolt, to scoop up Ben and run until the air didn't taste of his anger. But the walls of her reality hemmed her in. She had nowhere to go, no safety net to catch her and her newborn son. Her family was an ocean away, tethered to a life she'd left behind, and her friends, those few she'd made here, felt too distant, too fragile to burden with the weight of her unraveling world. His parents offered no refuge. Ken and Amanda were as cold as the marble floors of their sprawling home, their loyalty welded to Russell's every word. He'd spun a tale about her to them long ago, a clumsy, ungrateful girl he'd rescued from ruin, a narrative they swallowed whole. When she'd tried to hint at the truth during a tense family dinner, Amanda had pursed her lips and said, "Russell's always been so patient with you." While Ken's steely gaze dismissed her entirely. They'd never believe her, never see past the golden sun they'd raised. That night, after Russell stormed off to sulk on the couch, Angelica retreated to the bedroom, locking the door behind her. She sank onto the bed, little Ben cradled in her arms, his tiny body warm against her chest. For the first time, panic clawed its way out of her, spilling over in wrenching sobs she couldn't stifle. Tears streamed down her face, soaking the soft tuft of Ben's hair as he cooed, oblivious to the storm raging in her. She held him tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs. His small, steady breaths, the only anchor keeping her from drowning in despair. She needed to escape this monster. She saw it now, clear as daylight. Russell had used her, preyed on her dreams and vulnerability, reeled her in with promises until he'd gotten what he wanted. And now, with Ben born and her spirit fraying, he was done with her, discarding her like a broken thing. The next morning, as he sipped coffee at the kitchen counter, she found her voice, trembling but resolute. "If you ever touch me again, I'll call the police," she said, her hands clenched at her sides. "I'll tell them everything, every word, every hit." Russell didn't even flinch. He set his mug down, a slow, mocking laugh rumbling from his chest. "Go ahead," he said, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. I'm a lawyer, Angelica. I know people, cops, judges, you name it. Who do you think they'll believe? Me, with my record and my connections, or you, some nobody with a sob story?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a taunt. "They'll laugh you out of the station." Her stomach twisted, fear and fury tangling into a knot. He was right. His world was built on power, a web of influence she couldn't hope to pierce. She stood there, frozen, as he smirked and turned back to his coffee, dismissing her as if she were nothing. But in that moment, something hardened inside her, a quiet resolve taking root beneath the panic. She didn't know how yet, didn't know where she'd find the strength, but she'd get out. For Ben, for herself. She'd find a way to break free from the cage he'd locked her in. No matter how desperately Angelica yearned to grab Ben and flee, to leave Russell's shadow behind forever, she knew she'd have to bide her time a little longer. Then, one gray afternoon, as she folded Ben's tiny onesies in the dim light of their apartment, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. A woman's voice, calm but urgent, came through the line. "Hi, Angelica. My name's Rachel. I need to meet you. It's about Russell. I can help." They arranged to meet the next day at a small, out-of-the-way diner, its faded sign flickering above a row of cracked vinyl booths. Angelica arrived with Ben in her arms, his stroller bumping over the uneven pavement, her nerves jangling like loose change. The woman waiting for her stood as she approached, tall, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes carrying a quiet intensity. "I'm Rachel," she said, offering a hand. "Russell's sister." Angelica's breath hitched, her grip tightening on Ben's stroller. "His sister?" she echoed, sliding into the booth, her mind racing. Russell had never mentioned a sister, not once. Rachel sat across from her, folding her hands on the table, her expression softening as she took in Angelica's wary gaze. "I know this is a shock," Rachel began, her voice steady. "I've been out of the picture for a while, 7 years, actually. My parents disowned me when I threatened to expose their dirty business dealings. They've always been about power, money, control. Russell's their golden boy, and I was the troublemaker who wouldn't play along." Angelica stared, piecing it together. A sister-in-law she'd never known existed, and one who seemed fair, decent, unlike the cold, complicit family she'd met. "I didn't even know he had a sister," she murmured, bouncing Ben gently as he fussed. Rachel's eyes darkened with regret. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through with him. I know my brother. Spoiled, narcissistic, cruel. He was the favorite growing up, got all the attention, all the praise. Nothing was ever his fault. And you're not the first, Angelica. He's been married twice before you. Both times he was abusive, emotionally, physically, the works. I saw it happen, and I couldn't stop it." Tears welled in Angelica's eyes, spilling over as she clutched Ben closer, his soft weight grounding her. "Twice," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" The betrayal stung deeper now, a wound reopened with every word. Rachel leaned forward, her tone fierce but tender. "I tried to help those women, but I'm a lawyer too, and going up against my family, it's a wall of influence I couldn't break through back then. Russell's got connections, and my parents, they're untouchable. I've carried that guilt for years, knowing I failed them. But when I heard about you, I couldn't sit by anymore. I'm done letting him ruin lives. Even if it means turning on my own brother, even if it means getting him locked up, I'm going to help you." Angelica's sobs came harder now, a flood of relief and fear tangling together. "Why go against him?" she asked, wiping her cheeks with a trembling hand. "He's your family." "Because it's right," Rachel said simply, her jaw set. "And because I've seen what he does, how he charms, controls, then destroys. You don't deserve this. Neither did they. I've got resources now, a plan. We'll get you out, and we'll make him pay." For the first time in months, a flicker of hope pierced the fog of Angelica's despair. She looked at Rachel, this unexpected ally, and nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay, please, help me." From that pivotal day with Rachel, Angelica began plotting her escape, each step a quiet rebellion against the prison Russell had built around her. Living with him grew more unbearable by the hour, his presence a suffocating weight, but she learned to mask her turmoil. She became a ghost of herself, silent, compliant, her true feelings buried deep as she followed Rachel's careful instructions. The first task was daunting. Document everything. Every outburst, every cruel word, every threat. At first, fear gripped her, the old instinct to shrink and endure nearly overwhelming. But now, she turned her phone's recorder on discreetly, capturing his rages, or scribbled notes in a hidden journal when she couldn't risk the sound. Each entry became a silent witness, a growing arsenal of evidence to reclaim her life. One evening, after an especially vicious argument, the dam broke. Russell had been needling her all day, his temper simmering, until she dared to ask him to lower his voice so Ben wouldn't wake. He exploded, snatching her favorite vase, a delicate hand-painted gift from her mother, and hurling it against the wall. It shattered into 100 jagged pieces, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Angelica stood frozen, staring at the wreckage, and something inside her snapped, not with despair, but with a fierce, unshakable resolve. She wouldn't let him destroy her too. Rachel was her lifeline through it all. She guided Angelica to the police station, her steady hand on her arm as they filed a report, detailing every instance of violence with clinical precision. Rachel explained her rights in a calm, measured voice, restraining orders, custody options, the legal labyrinth ahead, while preparing her for the fight to come. She wasn't just Russell's sister anymore. She was Angelica's lawyer, her confidant, her beacon of hope in a storm that had raged too long. The night of the dinner at Russell's parents' house loomed like a deadline. Angelica knew it was time. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed that final, irrefutable piece of evidence to shatter Russell's impunity, to prove to the world what he was. He wouldn't stop, she knew that. He'd keep humiliating her, hitting her, grinding her down until nothing of her remained. But she'd decided that was over. She'd take back her life no matter the cost. When Russell's hand struck her cheek that night, the sharp sting didn't register as pain. It was relief, a clarion call. "It's over," she thought, her lips curling into a cold, vengeful smile as she straightened. Russell faltered, confusion flickering in his eyes. He didn't grasp what that smile meant, but a primal unease stirred in him, a whisper that something was slipping from his grasp. Back at the table, he couldn't stop glancing at her, his usual swagger undercut by a nervous edge. Her demeanor unnerved him. No tears, no panic, just an eerie calm that mirrored nothing he'd seen in her before. Later, when they returned home, Angelica collected Ben from the nanny, her touch gentle as she carried him to the bedroom. Russell followed, his steps cautious, his voice probing as he lingered in the doorway. "You've been acting strange," he said, his tone laced with suspicion. "Have you been seeing someone? Talking to someone behind my back?" She met his gaze, her expression unreadable, deflecting his questions with vague murmurs. "I don't know what you mean," she said, rocking Ben as he drifted to sleep. The conversation fizzled, circling nowhere, but inside, Angelica was alight with a quiet triumph. He sensed something. She could tell. His paranoia was a crack in his armor. Still, the biggest battle lay ahead. She'd planted the seeds, gathered the proof, and with Rachel by her side, she was ready to bring the whole rotting edifice of his control crashing down. The next morning, a sharp, insistent knock jolted Russell awake. He groaned, rolling over in the tangled sheets, the clock blinking 6:47 a.m. "Who the hell?" he muttered, dragging a hand through his hair as he stumbled to the door, irritation simmering. He yanked it open, ready to snap, but the sight of two uniformed police officers standing there stopped him cold. "Russell Rogers?" the first officer asked, his voice flat and dry, his eyes scanning Russell with detached scrutiny. "Yes, that's me," Russell replied, forcing a casual tone, despite the sudden chill snaking down his spine. "What's this about?" "Please come with us to the station for questioning," the second officer said, his words clipped, leaving no room for negotiation. Russell blinked, his mind scrambling to catch up. "There's gotta be a mistake," he said, a nervous laugh escaping him as he leaned against the doorframe. "What's this about? I haven't done anything." The officers didn't budge, their faces stone-like, and the first one gestured toward the apartment. "Get dressed and come with us now." Stunned, Russell retreated inside, his thoughts racing. "A mistake," he told himself, pulling on a shirt and slacks with shaking hands. "Some idiot mixed up names or addresses. This'll blow over." But the icy grip in his gut tightened as he followed the officers to their cruiser, the early morning air biting at his skin. At the station, they ushered him into a stark, fluorescent-lit room, the kind he'd seen in depositions, but never from this side. An investigator, middle-aged with a lined face and a no-nonsense stare, sat across from him, a thin file open on the table. Russell squared his shoulders, clinging to his lawyer's bravado, ready to talk his way out of whatever this was. The investigator didn't waste a breath. "Mr. Rogers, you're accused of causing bodily harm to your wife, Angelica Rogers," he said, his tone even, cutting. "Are you aware of this?" Russell's pulse spiked, anger surging hot and fast. "That's ridiculous," he snapped, leaning forward, his voice rising with indignation. "I've never touched Angelica, never. This is insane, a complete fabrication. You've got the wrong guy." The investigator didn't flinch, his expression unmoved by the outburst. He reached into the file and slid a stack of photographs across the table, fanning them out with deliberate calm. Russell's breath caught as he looked down. Images of Angelica stared back at him, her face marred with purple bruises, a split lip, faint marks shadowing her arms and neck. The evidence was stark, undeniable, captured in cold clinical detail. "Is this a mistake, too?" the investigator asked, his gaze locking onto Russell's, steady and piercing. Russell's composure fissured, his mouth opening and closing as he groped for a defense. She must have fallen," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a weak rush. "Maybe she tripped or something, I don't know." Even as he said it, he heard how hollow it sounded, how desperate. The investigator's lips twitched into a faint, sardonic smirk. "Fallen multiple times, huh? Always hitting her face on the same object? You expect me to buy that?" His voice dripped with disbelief, cutting through Russell's flimsy excuse like a knife. Russell sank back in the chair, silence swallowing him whole. His lies crumbled under the weight of those photos, his mind spinning as panic clawed up his throat. He was cornered, the walls of his carefully constructed world closing in, and for the first time, he felt the ground slipping out from under him, his charm, his connections, his control, all useless against the truth, staring him down. In the midst of their frantic efforts to shield Russell, Ken and Amanda hit a wall of dwindling options. Their usual allies were scrambling, but the case was tightening around their son like a noose. With a shared, reluctant glance, they decided to reach into the past. Ken pulled out his phone and dialed Rachel's number, a line they hadn't crossed in years, not since they'd severed ties with their daughter. The phone rang, each tone a reminder of the silence that had stretched between them until her voice came through, cool and distant. "Yes?" "Rachel, it's your father," Ken started, his tone clipped but edged with urgency. "Your brother's in trouble, serious trouble. His wife, Angelica, she's fabricated lies, claiming he hurt her, trying to lock him up and take his money. We need you to step in." Rachel stayed silent, letting their words hang in the air, her breathing steady on the other end. When she finally spoke, Her voice was low, sharp with years of pent-up resentment. "How dare you call me now? After everything you said last time, when I tried to tell you what you were doing was wrong, corrupt, rotten, you told me I was dead to you, that I'd never be welcome again, and now you just pick up the phone like nothing happened?" Amanda jumped in, her voice softening into a practiced coo. "Oh, Rachel, we were upset back then. Things got out of hand. You know how it is with family. Oh, but you've always been so clever, so strong. We've missed you, darling. Time's past. It's water under the bridge. Let's move on, for Russell's sake." "Move on?" Rachel's tone hardened, cutting through the flattery. "What do you want from me? Just say it." Ken cleared his throat, dropping the pretense. "We need you to represent Russell in court. He's your brother, Rachel. He needs someone sharp, someone we can trust. You're his best chance." A beat of silence stretched, taut and heavy. "I can't," Rachel said flatly. "I'll be busy that day." "Busy?" Amanda's voice spiked, incredulous. "Rachel, this is your family. You can't just turn your back." "I said I can't," Rachel interrupted, her words a steel door slamming shut. "Goodbye." The call ended with a click, leaving Ken and Amanda staring at the phone, their desperation curdling into frustration. They had no hold over her, no card left to play, and with a muttered curse, Ken tossed the phone aside. "Stubborn as ever," he growled, but they were out of moves. The day of the court hearing dawned crisp and clear, the courtroom a battleground of tension and anticipation. Russell sat at the defense table, his suit impeccable, but his confidence threadbare, flanked by his parents and their hired attorney, a silver-haired shark with a reputation for winning unwinnable cases. The gallery murmured as proceedings began, but the air shifted, electric and sharp, when Rachel walked in. She moved with purpose, her dark suit crisp, her briefcase swinging at her side. Instead of joining Russell's team, she crossed to the plaintiff's table, standing beside Angelica, who sat with Ben's stroller close, her face resolute. A collective gasp rippled through Russell's side. Amanda's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief, while Ken's face turned a mottled red, his fists balling on the bench. Russell lurched forward, his voice a harsh whisper. "What the heck is she doing?" His lawyer shot him a sharp look, urging silence, but the shock was palpable. Rachel faced the judge, her posture unyielding. "Your Honor," she began, her voice ringing clear, "I'm here representing Angelica Rogers. We'll be presenting evidence of prolonged physical and emotional abuse perpetrated by the defendant, Russell Rogers." She laid out the case with precision, photographs of bruises, audio clips of Russell's tirades, Angelica's quiet, steady testimony, each piece a dagger aimed at the heart of her family's lies. Ken and Amanda sat frozen, their carefully curated world cracking apart. Russell's bravado dissolved, his eyes darting between his sister and his wife, the sister he'd dismissed now wielding the truth like a weapon against him. The courtroom buzzed, but for Russell's side it was a stunned, helpless silence. They'd never seen this coming, never imagined Rachel would turn the family's own blood against them. The courtroom fell silent as the judge's gavel struck, a sharp, final sound that echoed through the chamber. "Russell Rogers, you are hereby found guilty of multiple counts of domestic violence and assault," the judge declared, his voice steady and resolute. "You are sentenced to 8 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 5. Russell's face drained of color, his hands gripping the edge of the table as the reality sank in. His lawyer slumped beside him, defeated, while Ken and Amanda sat rigid in the gallery, their expressions a mix of fury and disbelief. The officers moved forward, cuffs clinking as they secured Russell's wrists, leading him away through a side door. He didn't look back. The fallout was swift and brutal. The Rogers family's pristine reputation, built on decades of wealth, influence, and carefully curated appearances, crumbled like a house of cards. Whispers turned to headlines. prominent lawyer jailed for abuse. Rogers' family scandal rocks elite circles. Contracts evaporated as clients distanced themselves, unwilling to taint their brands with the stench of scandal. Ken's phone stopped ringing with offers, and Amanda's social invitations dried up, leaving them isolated in their opulent, empty home. The empire they'd fought to protect lay in ruins, a casualty of their son's crimes and their own complicity. Angelica wasted no time. With Russell gone, she returned to the apartment they'd shared, a place once suffused with tension, now eerily quiet. She packed her things methodically. Ben's clothes and toys, her own modest wardrobe, the biology textbooks she'd clung to like lifelines. The space felt foreign now, stripped of its menace, and she left without a backward glance, the keys clattering into the landlord's mailbox. They settled in Rachel's modest but warm townhouse on the edge of the city. It wasn't luxurious like the Rogers world, but it was safe, a haven where Ben's laughter soon filled the rooms. They settled into a rhythm, two women bound by survival and a shared defiance. Over late-night cups of tea, as Ben slept in the next room, Rachel opened up in a way she never had before. "I always wanted a sister," she confessed one evening, her voice soft, her gaze distant. "Growing up, it was just me and Russell, and he was, well, you know. I dream about having someone to play dolls with, to share secrets with. Someone kind, someone real. Those dreams stayed dreams. Until now." She smiled at Angelica, a rare vulnerability in her eyes. "You're what I imagined." Angelica reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You're more than I ever hoped for in a sister," she said, and from that night their bond deepened, a sisterhood forged in the fire of their pasts. Rachel became Ben's fierce aunt, his protector, and Angelica's rock, her guide through the wreckage Russell had left behind. With Rachel's support, Angelica threw herself back into her studies. Rachel helped with tuition, making good on promises Russell had dangled and discarded, arranging childcare for Ben, and sitting up with her through late-night cramming sessions. Years of hard work culminated in a crisp spring day when Angelica walked across a stage, her cap and gown fluttering, to accept her biology degree. Rachel cheered loudest from the stands, Ben perched on her lap, clapping with chubby hands. That diploma was more than paper. It was freedom, a testament to the life she'd reclaimed. Soon after, Angelica landed a job at a prestigious scientific institute, studying algae and its potential to yield medicines for rare diseases. She thrived there, her days filled with microscopes and petri dishes, her mind alight with discovery. Years later, her persistence paid off. She identified a compound in a rare algae strain that showed promise against a devastating illness. When the time came to name it, she didn't hesitate. Rachelin, she called it, a tribute etched in science to the woman who'd saved her. The announcement brought tears to Rachel's eyes, a quiet pride blooming as she hugged Angelica tight at the Institute's gala. Through it all, Angelica remained a constant in Rachel's life, there for her through late-night case frustrations, celebrating her victories, building a family not of blood but of choice. Ben grew up with two mothers in all but name, his world rich with love and stability, and as Angelica stood in her lab, gazing at the algae that bore Rachel's name, she knew she'd not just survived Russell, she'd transcended him, her life a testament to resilience, sisterhood, and the power of fighting back.